Welcome, everybody. My name is Bert Shee. I'm a professor in the Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering here at HKUST, where I also direct the Center for Aging Science. And so I have a keen interest in the intersection between the life sciences and technology. Thus, it's my great pleasure to introduce this is IAS Distinguished Lecture by Professor Dario FLOREANO. Professor FLOREANO is the director of the Laboratory of Intelligent Systems at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland. As the founding director of the Swiss National Center of Competence and Research in Robotics from 2010 to 2022, he shaped the growth and development of the Swiss robotics ecosystem. His research interests include understanding the principles of embodied AI from nature and exploiting those to develop bio-inspired robotic systems. He's made pioneering contributions in the fields of evolutionary robotics, aerial robotics, and soft robotics. For these contributions, he's received many awards. He's a fellow of the IEEE and of the European Center for Living Technology, and he was named AI Influencer in Switzerland in 2021. He continues to contribute to scientific progress with the service on many boards of scientific organizations, such as the Ellis Tübingen Institute for Machine Learning, the Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems, the General Agenda Council on Robotics for the World Economic Forum, and many others. So I'm sure all of you share my excitement to hear Professor FLOREANO's talk on from flying animals to drones and back. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor FLOREANO to the stage. Dario?
Thank you very much, Bert, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining this talk. So as you can see on this on the screen, on the background of the screen is an artistic rendering of a vision that I had when I started my laboratory many years ago, 25 years ago at EPFL. I was talking to a journalist, and then I said, I would like to design machines that are lightweight, that can do very complex, intelligent tasks by using very little computational power. They are super agile, and they can understand how to coordinate with themselves. And I was specifically targeting, I do a lot of different robotics types, even quadrupeds, all sorts of robots. But one of the streams of research that has persisted throughout the years is the design of these lightweight flying machines, because they have very stringent constraints when it comes to computer vision, behavioral intelligence, and morphologies. And so over the years, we have been working on different aspects of this vision, including the sensors, the intelligence, the morphology, the coordination among all these different drones, the understanding of the environment, and more recently, even the interaction between a human and drones, and a human becoming a drone becoming a swarm of drones. So I want to talk about all of this. Today, since we are here at the Institute of Advanced Science, I thought I should focus my presentation on science and show how we take inspiration from biology to solve problems in robotics, so how to design better robots by taking inspiration from biology. By when I say taking inspiration, is trying to extract principles and translate them into an engineering something that makes sense in engineering, and then using these robots as models to understand biology, as models to understand things that biologists cannot possibly do with animals for technical or ethical reasons. Before I go into that, I want to show to you a sample of previous older work where we do not go back. We just go one direction, and from biology to engineering, and show to you how we do the process. So for example, one of the very first problems, if you want to have a lightweight machine that flies among obstacles or humans, is to understand where the things are, how far they are. And if you want to do it in an efficient way, it's interesting to look at how insects do it. And insects there is evidence for the past 70 years, they use optic flow. So their eyes are distributed eyes, so they are called compound eyes. You're looking at a section of an insect, in this case, I guess it's a housefly, a head cut across the head, and you're looking at all these compound eyes. They're made of many small eyes. Each of these eyes has a very narrow field of view, only 3 to 5 degrees field of view, and they only have 5 to 7 photoreceptors sitting at the end of this lens. So what does it mean? What these insects do, as it has been shown already 70 years ago, is that as they move through the environment, the features of the environment, the contrast moves in their field of view and excites the photoreceptors on these different eyes. In the very early stages of the brain of these insects, just 1 or 2 neurons under this, there are specialized neurons that detect the motion of the features as projected on the retina, if you like, compound retina of this insect as it flies through. And it turns out that just a few synapses away, so 3 layers of connections, sitting here in the lobula plata, there are neurons that compute optic flow. And what optic flow is simply a way of, the optic flow is the pattern of magnitude of translation of all these features in the projection of the eye of the insect. So all these arrows here. So it's 0 in the direction you fly. Nothing moves in the direction you move because nothing moves there. But everything around you moves. And the faster you move, the faster they move, and the number of things. So anyway, back in the 80s, Kundering and others figured out the mathematical relation between the magnitude and a few other properties of this optic flow and the distance of the objects in the environment from the perceiver. So what insect brain does in only 3 layers of synapse is to use this optic flow to understand the distance of the objects around them, or to estimate their own speed, or to do a number of things like attitude stabilization, collision avoidance, altitude regulation, landing, chasing other insects, homing for those insects that have a nest. They even use optic flow, the memory of the optic flow, to go back to the nest, and even swarming. Of course, they do all these things by fusing information from optic flow in different regions of their field of view. And so it takes a few layers of synapses further, but optic flow seems to be the key. And it's very efficient. So at the very beginning, we said, okay, we are talking about back 2009, we could design a compound camera instead of having a single camera. We have a few small optic sensors pointing in front of a drone. Here you're looking at the tip of a drone. It's a fixed-wing drone. And we went to Logitech, which was a company making a mouse and peripherals, was on the campus, in the Innovation Park at the PFL campus. And they designed the first optic mouse. They had a very small chip that was actually computing optic flow as you move the mouse. So we took their chips, they gave us for free, and then we created the casing of the lenses. We reproduced this very narrow field of view of the insects, and then we implemented this very simple neural circuitry in a few lines of code in this drone that neurophysiologist shows that insects use. And with just literally 80 lines of code, we have this drone that avoids the trees, avoids the ground, so it maintains altitude by avoiding the ground, and it maintains also attitude. So few lines of code, they do everything. Altitude regulation, attitude regulation, obstacle avoidance. And at that time, we said, wow, we can fly these drones autonomously without piloting. So we created, out of this innovation and many other, a company back in 2009. It was shortly after DJI was created. We were not aware of DJI at that time. So we created a company. We were working on fixed-wing drones. And we said, OK, great. We could use this, our technology to let these flying wing drones gather images from very large spaces, take photographs. Then they should come back with all their photographs in their memory for then later analysis. But the problem of operating this drone is landing. So an operator has a very hard time making sure that the drone lands in the appropriate space at the appropriate location. If it's a quadrotor, no problem. You just drive it on top and then you make it land. But if it's a fixed-wing drone, it's more difficult. And the GPS information for altitude is not good enough. So what we did is that we used our technology inspired from insects in the belly of the drone. So as the drone came back to the operator automatically, it would start the landing procedure fusing information from GPS and information from this neuromorphic chip to gradually slow down the speed, pitch up, and land. And we could guarantee 5-meter landing from the person. We had a number of technologies, but so this was one of the very first technologies we used to create this company, which eventually grew up to 200 employees. We sold it to Parrot. At the time, DJI was growing as well. So at the time, we decided it was a good time to sell it to Parrot, which was a company making drones. And then Parrot recently resold SenseFly to AG Eagle, which is a leading company for agricultural solution, robotic solution, including drones. So the company is still in operation. We also made a compound eye later on, much smaller than the one you've seen. So we packed 700 eyes, compound eyes, in that scaffold over there. We used neuromorphic chips, behind each of these lenses. So the dimensions were very small, not as small as insects, but if you give us 250 millions here, this was the very first time there was an evidence of a compound eye in nature. So this was used by trilobites. I mean, it was found on trilobites living in the bottom of the ocean floors between 250 million and 500 million years ago here. And they had the same cylindrical space as our first artifact. So give us more years, and then I'm sure we can shrink it down. So more recently, our compound eye was used by Guido de Kroon at Technical University of Delft. He published a paper in Nature where he put our sensor on his flapper. He's a flapping wing drone. And he showed that by using compound optic flow from compound vision, a flapping wing drone could stabilize and control its own motion without any vestibular information, without any other inertial measurement units, which was still an unknown question for some insects. So I don't go into more details, but just to show that someone else later on then used this technology for understanding a biological question. Another question we looked at later on was, how can we fly in confined spaces with a lot of obstacles and maybe cables? So this was after Fukushima, was a picture from there. And even if you have the best vision system, sooner or later you will hit a cable that you cannot see, and so you fall to the ground. And if it's a robot falling to the ground, then mission completed, mission ended. And so what can we do with that? I sent at that time a student of mine, a master's student, to my colleague Rob Wood at Harvard University. And my student developed a device to film houseflies flying in very confined spaces. When the student came back with this video footage, I was astonished because I said, well, the insects are not avoiding the obstacles. They just keep colliding with things when the environment is very confined. And they absorb the collision by means of their exoskeletal structure, including the compound eyes, which deform and then go back in space. And so that's a different way of thinking about the problem, using your morphology. And so with my students, we first thought of, okay, we could encapsulate the drone in with a cage, but the problem would still be that the drone hits an obstacle, it is destabilized, the thrust force goes in the wrong direction, and the drone falls to the ground. And so my students said, well, we could have a passive gimbal structure around the drone that absorbs the collision, and so that the thrust vector is not affected by the collision because the gimbal structure outside freely rotates around it. And so we said, okay, hey, we could make a second spin-off because we can now fly in confined spaces. We can go anywhere. You don't need to avoid things. And you can get very close to structure. You can even roll on structure and get put up with a camera on board. You can get very close nearby pictures. So anyone, not even skilled people, could actually drive these drones around. So we created that time Flyability. It was a few years ago. The company is still private. It has almost 100 employees. Still based near EPFL, and it's a leading company for inspection of industrial boilers, tanker ships, any space confined where a human has difficult to go could go. So these are examples of how we take inspiration from biology. We abstract principles, and we translate that into engineering, and we make robots that solve problems. Now, I would like now to focus on how can we go back to biology. And I would like to take a step back. This is a picture that from an article that I wrote with my colleague Rob Wood at Harvard during a sabbatical back in 2015. So it's 10 years old. The data here, you should not look at the particular data, but the trends are still similar. So what we were looking at was the mass of the vehicles of the drone. This is a logarithmic scale. So we are talking about 10 grams here, 100 grams, 1 kilogram at the end. And then we're looking at the flight time for different types of drones. Essentially, drones fall into three categories. Fixed-wing drones, which are the blue circles. You've got rotorcraft, so multicopters, which are the triangular green shapes. And then you've got flapping-wing drones, which are the red squares. And what you can see there are combinations of all of this. So this is today with all sorts of combinations, but roughly these are the three categories. And then this is an outlier, because later on there was another paper, even smaller vehicle, smaller flight time. But what you can see there is clearly a trend, as expected, in as you decrease the vehicle mass, the flight time also decreases. But the other interesting trend here is that you've got multicopters here, and then you've got fixed-wing. Fixed-wing drones are the drones that, for the same mass, give you the longest endurance. So if you have an application like surveillance of large fields, of course you want to use the fixed-wing drones because for the same mass, you get so much more endurance. But if you want to scale things down, the best is to use flapping wings. So flapping wings at low dimension, low Reynolds numbers, are much more efficient in terms of flight time than quadrotors and fixed wings. So these are interesting things. Now, for the past 10 years, most of the drones that we see around are multicopters of some type. So they are the green triangles. And so what about these other two regions? How can we actually improve the properties or build more on the properties of these two extremes, which are not yet well explored, but have a large potential in scalability down and endurance up? And so these are, I want to show you now examples of how we take inspiration from nature into these two areas to improve the property of these machines and then go back to biology. And let's start with flapping wings. So when you look at flapping wing insects, most of the insects, except for dragonfly, maybe and a few others, but most of the insects keep their wings folded against their body when they are on the ground, when they walk, and then they unfold the wings and they start flying. So some insects, like Coleoptera, family of beetles, encapsulate their hind wings or their flapping wings into another type of structure. It's called elytra, which is used for protection, essentially. It does contribute a little bit to aerodynamic lift, but it's not really used to sustain the insect. Now, that's what insects do. When you look instead at flapping wing robots, and here I showed to you some examples of flapping wing robots, tiny ones. You see the mass increase from very small one, the RoboBees from Harvard University, and now at MIT there are also very nice tiny flapping wing robots, all the way to larger ones. These are palm size. They have one thing in common. They don't fold their wings. They all have with the open wings. And this is a problem, because if you are small and if you fall to the ground, it's okay. It doesn't break. But as you start to scale up at this scale, if you fly high and then you fall to the ground, the wings will break. And so the question is, how can we design very small flapping wing drones, perhaps at this scale where fall to the ground is, so that their wings can be protected when they are on the ground. And it is interesting to look at Coleoptera. So with my postdoc, Hongwoo Fan and Professor Park in Korea, we asked the question of how do Coleoptera, like beetles, deploy their wings. Now, beetles have this structure here. They're called elytra, the protective wings. And what they do when they start flapping is that there is a first phase where they open up the elytra, this very hard, rigid structure, which releases the hind wing. So the hind wing is folded inside, and there is some elastic energy which is stored by the folding, which is then released. Just like that. And then what the insect does is that it starts flapping their wings and elevating the wings. So this is called the second phase here. I want to show to you it in the video so it becomes clearer. So you see, this is the Coleoptera suspended with a cable. So in slow motion, you see they start flapping the wings and elevating their wings. Now, biologists think that Coleoptera, just like all the other insects, have special muscles in the thorax to open up the wings, take them to the horizontal level, and start flapping. And we asked ourselves the question, I won't go into the graphics, is it really true? Or could there be a passive or other forces at play that do not require active muscles to open up the wings? And so that was our working hypothesis. And so one of the interesting things, so the first thing is that we noticed is that when you have, what we are measuring here is the elevation of the wings. So when you go down to 0, it means that the hind wing, the flapping wing, goes up to horizontal level. So this is the level you need in order for the insect to flap. The insects flap like this. It's like an helicopter, essentially. So and what you can see is that as the insect starts flying, it elevates, it goes, you see that the wing goes up to 0 degree. So it goes up here. Now, and you can see here, the situation. Oh, so sorry. This is the closure. I should have. Sorry, I inverted this. So here we're looking at the closure. So the other thing is that the insects, when they stop, is the other way around. When the insects stop, if I can play this, stop flying, what is happening is that the elytron, the hindwings go down, and then the elytron closes. And what you can see is that what is happening, if the insect has the elytron, the wings are entirely folded against the body. But if we remove the elytron, the wings can still be closed. Not entirely. You can see that now the insect is stopping to fly, and you can see that the hindwing still goes down. And then the insect uses the elytron to help finish the closing. So this gave us reinforced our hypothesis that because the insects use the elytron to help closing entirely the wing, probably there is no muscle involved in closing the wing. So in order to test whether the insects need an active muscle or not to close these wings, we designed a very small robotic flapper that you can see here. So this is just a small machine that flaps the wings. And we attached the wing of a beetle here. You see the folded wing of the beetle. And then what we do is that the robot simply starts flapping it, but there is no muscle that elevates the wings. It simply starts flapping. And our hypothesis was that only the centrifugal force is sufficient for deploying this wing. So we can do also the mathematics. So the elevation angle is proportional to a number of forces. The weight force makes the wing close. Then there is the inertial force. The inertial force is positive, makes the wing go up when the insect flaps like this, but makes the wing goes down when the insect flaps back. Then there is the lift force generated simply by the motion, because it's not entirely vertical. This produces a lift force which lifts up the insect. There is the drag force, however, that makes the insect go down. And then there is the centrifugal force, which produces most of the lift action. And so this is our robot. It starts flapping at the same frequency, so 35 beats per second, just like the beetle. And you can see that the wing very nicely deploys up. Then we have a trajectory of the wing of the beetle taken with the camera, and of our robot is the same. I won't go into the details. Now we have to design a robot and test it. Does it really work? Can we have a robot that unfolds the wings without any active muscles? We did not design the elytra because it would have been complex. So we have this very tiny flapping wing robot. In order to complete the complete closure of the wing, where the insect uses the elytra to completely close the wing, instead of doing that, what we do is that we have an elastic tendon here at the base. This elastic tendon does not create too much resistance when the insect starts flapping, so it's much smaller the resistance than the centrifugal force, but it is sufficient once the wing is down to completely close it around the body of the insect. So that's the only simple thing. It's our replacement for the elytra. And so you put this together, and you can see that our insect just simply starts flapping the wings, and then from the vertical position, they go up and they flap. So it's very stable. There is absolutely no control problem. We can do it multiple times, as you can see in this drone. So in this video, as you can see, multiple trials. It's always quite stable, and then it lands back. Whenever the insect lands, then automatically stops flapping. Automatically, the wings go down. Why is that interesting? It's interesting because the drone is much more compact. You can carry around without having all the wings open. But also, it's interesting because, if there is a collision, for example, like this, you have the insect colliding with an obstacle. The insect will be destabilized, as you will see in a moment. And then what we realize, as soon as we realize that there is destabilization, we switch off the motor, and the wings automatically close. When the drone, hits the ground, the wings are closed, so there is no damage whatsoever to their wings. So this is one way in which we can go from biology to engineering and then back to biology. So our hypothesis is that certainly our hypothesis, this type of coleoptera does not require active muscles to close and open the wings. And maybe our hypothesis that many other insects do not require those muscles that biologists hypothesize exist. They're very difficult to dissect because it's a very complex muscular structure in the thorax of the insect. But let's now move on to larger drones. I said fixed-wing drones. So fixed-wing drones are great because they can cover large distances for the same mass compared to multicopters. However, they require a difficult takeoff and landing procedure. There are some vertical takeoff and landing fixed-wing drones today, but they still have limited agility and maneuverability, meaning that if you want to change the direction of flight, it takes some space for a wing drone compared to a multicopter, which can simply EO and change rapidly the direction. So the agility of multicopters is much greater than fixed wings, but multicopters spend most of their energy to fight gravity and stay in the air. And so the residual energy that is available for moving around is small, and that's why they fly less. How can we possibly find a trade-off between these two worlds? So how can we find or design a flying machine that is approximating the agility of multicopters and, if necessary, achieve the endurance of fixed-wing drones? And again, we look at nature, and we have birds. Birds have these amazing capabilities of morphing their wings, not only to pass through narrow passages, but also to perform very tight turns and to perform very sharp perching maneuvers. And the way in which they do that is not so much because they flap their wings, but because they morph the wing and the tail. In all these very agile maneuvers, there is almost no flapping. There is a very calibrated synergy of morphing of the tail and the wings to redirect the total aerodynamic forces in the desired direction. And so the question is, how can we design machines? How can we abstract these principles of morphing wings and tails so that we can design wing drones that, not necessarily flapping wing drones, but wing drones that can have the same agility and, if required, the same also endurance. And so the first thing I did was to go to talk to my colleagues who study birds to try to understand how birds do different types of maneuvers, turning maneuvers, landing maneuvers, perch maneuvers. Well, I don't want to say, I know it's recorded, I don't want to say they do not know, but they do observations. So they take movies and then they put forward hypotheses, but it's very difficult to find these birds in controlled laboratory experiments as you can do with insects. Also, these are very intelligent animals. They do not always do what you expect them to do, and so it's complicated. And then I said, okay, then we could create a model, a simulation, and start to study different strategies in simulation. So I went to our colleagues in fluid dynamics, and I asked, what is the state of the art to model this? I know it's difficult, but what could we do? And I said, no, this is impossible, because here we are dealing with aeroelastic phenomena. And aeroelastic phenomena is a situation where the wing is not a fixed rigid plate, where you only study the interaction between the wing or the fixed plate, the rigid surface, and the fluid. But as the wing moves, it's flexible, so it deforms its shape. As soon as it deforms its shape, the aerodynamic forces change. So there is an interplay of the interaction with the medium and the structure, which continuously changes the aerodynamic properties. So this is very difficult to simulate. It's possible piecewise for very small pieces, but for a structure that has, for example, feathers like this, it's impossible. So simulating anything like this would have been difficult. Okay, so we said then the best way of doing this is we build a drone that approximates a bird, and then we start characterizing and studying that. Now, how do you translate a bird into a flying machine? So remember, the hypothesis is that morphing wings and morphing tail is the important part. It's not the flapping. So since flapping introduces very complex aerodynamic properties which are difficult to simulate and to recreate as well, we decided to use a propeller in front of the drone. So the thrust, the forward motion, is produced by a propeller, which is sufficiently further away from the wing so that it doesn't interfere so much with the wings. And then we have a morphing wing and morphing tail. We designed, the decision also, the second one, was to, in order to morph the wings, was to capture the concept of feathers. Feathers are nice in the sense that they they are flexible, but they have a controlled flexibility or rigidity along the profile of the feather, which we can actually capture. The second thing is that they can neatly fold one on top of the other without occupying any space. And compared to other solutions like membranes, as some people use continuous membranes, there is no fluttering structure moving around that creates aerodynamic interference. So we looked at the possibility of creating this very first approximation of the drone, which has these folding feathers and approximates the dimension in terms of weight and wingspan of the northern goshawk, which is a very agile bird that can combine agility as required or long-term endurance without any flapping of the wings. And so our drone was, as you're going to see in a moment, has these multiple degrees of freedom. It has the folding wing and folding tails. So we can, in this case, you see only binary cases. Of course, we can control them continuously. But here you just see the extreme fully folding, fully unfolded. We still have a vertical tail in this, but we have this opening of the wings. The vertical tail, the vertical structure here is necessary for yaw control. As you do maneuvers, you may spin around, and so you need some structure to stabilize it. In a moment, I will show to you how we can get rid of that too. But at the beginning, this was a very first interesting system that we could then try to characterize in a wind tunnel. In order to characterize in a wind tunnel, we have to do a lot of things. We have to put the drone at different angles of attack. The angle of attack is what really matters for measuring the drag and lift forces, which are necessary to compute the coefficients of drag and lift, and all the moments, the pitch, roll, and yaw moments. And so what we design, and it's a very lengthy process, we design what I call the robotic aerodynamic characterization system. We have an open wind tunnel. We blow air. It's a controllable structure. We can control the wind speed of all the wind pixels, as they are called. We put the drone in front of the wind tunnel, and the drone is on a robotic arm. The robotic arm can control the attitude of the drone. We can program it. And between the drone and the robotic arm, we have a 6-axis force sensor that continuously measures the forces and the moments for the drone at different angles of attack. At the same time, we can control all the morphing of the wing and the tail. So we have a lot of data. We hit a button, and the machine will start moving, changing the angle of attack, changing the morphology of the drone, and we measure all the forces that go to a computer. At the same time, we have a motion tracking hole all around, so we can measure with trackers the motion of the wings and all the deformation due to the forces coming from the wind. All of this goes into computer, and from there, we can design a model. Before we design a model, we have all the data, and we can start characterizing our drone. And I don't have time, and probably don't want to go into all of detail, so I just show to you an example of what we can understand out of all this characterization. So here we have our drone, and you can see on the top these colored configurations, black, green, blue, and red. You can see different configurations. So for example, tucked wing and tucked tail, you can see on the top. Then you have got the tucked wings and open tail, open wings and tucked tail, open tail and open wing. And all these have different configurations. So what we do is that we want to measure under what condition, under what angles of attack, which is the best configuration for the different angles of attack to produce better agility. So agility is the capability of changing the angular rate of the drone. So the more agile the drone is, the faster it can turn, the higher the angular rate. And the angular rate is proportional to the pitch and roll coefficient of our drone. For example, if you want to pitch down very rapidly, you must have very high pitch coefficient. Now, we can measure the pitch coefficient of different configurations of drones at different angles of attack. So this is the angle of attack. For example, 5 degrees is the typical cruising altitude, cruising flight of a drone of this size. And we can go up to 25 degrees or slightly down. The higher the pitch coefficient is, the more controllable the angular rate is. The better the drone, the more agile the drone is. And so you can see, for example, the black line is when the drone has tucked wing and tucked tail. And when you see the tucked wing and tucked tail, as expected from aerodynamics, if you fly up to, say, 5 to 7 degrees field angle of attack, then you can control the pitch quite well. If you fly at higher angle of attack, you cannot control so well your pitch angle. But if you go into the green configuration, you have even higher controllability. Now, what happens if you instead use this configuration? If you use this configuration, open tail and close wing, you see that our pitch coefficient is much better at higher angles of attack. Not so good here, however. And then you can see that when you do open tail and open wings, your angle of attack is very good at this peak here, and then it keeps decreasing down here. And so now, depending on the angle of attack at which the drone is flying, which you can measure, for example, with the national measurement units, we know precisely what is the best configuration to fly at in order to be maneuverable on the pitch angle. We can repeat the same story for roll, and we can do a lot of other things like controlling the stability, making a drone from stable to unstable. We have a lot of graphs like this. So we understand what are the effects of the different configurations on properties of the flight stability, agility, and maneuverability. And having all of that, we can program then a series of actions that a person would instruct the drone to go into. So, for example, you can see the drone, this one is remotely operated. It's the PhD student who operates it, and the PhD student gives the controller to the remote controller. Now, open the wing, open the tail, open the wing only to the left, so that you create an asymmetric force on the left and the right, which makes the drone roll. And so by creating these different control commands, the student can decide how agile the drone is, how it can turn in space. And that's great. Now, we can go back to biology now. How do birds actually turn? Now, when you have an aircraft turning, for example, you have the right and left ailerons. So you asymmetrically control these ailerons, and this initiates the turning maneuver. The drone rolls, goes at an angle. This is called a banking angle. And once it is at that angle, it accelerates, because otherwise, because of the lift forces decrease, it starts accelerating, and then it pitches up the elevator on the back to maintain the same altitude. And by pitching more the elevator, the aircraft can decrease the turning angle. So it's this combination of maneuvers that control the turning maneuver. Now, birds have two strategies. One strategy is similar to the aircraft. They can asymmetrically fold the wings. They fold one wing and they keep the other wing open. Higher lift force in one direction, lower in the other one. It will start rolling, and then they can extend the wing, which is equivalent to the pitch elevator, provides additional drag, and then they turn in this direction. Or they also have an additional degree of freedom. They have here a muscle that allows them to twist the wing. So by twisting the wing, supinating one wing, and pronating the other wing, they create asymmetric drag forces, opposing forces on the wings, which generates a turn maneuver. So we said, what strategies do birds use? So we went back to the biology, we looked for literature, and then the best literature is this one by, actually these are experts. Professor Graham Taylor at Oxford University is one of the leading experts in IAS Events. I'll get back to him in a moment, but they published this paper where they say they studied these soaring eagles. They don't flap their wings, they spend a lot of time just soaring in the sky, and they filmed them, and they said, well, sometimes they twist their wings, sometimes they morph their wings. We do not really know. It seems like a combination of the two. The bird decides at will. And we said, is it really? Nature is very parsimonious. So we designed a new variation of our drone where compared to the previous one, we added the possibility of twisting the wings, in addition to morphing the wings. And to make a very long story short, what we realized is that depending on the angles of attack, twisting the wings is better than folding the wings. So twisting the wings is the red configuration. So we are looking at the roll coefficient. Remember, the higher the roll coefficient is, the higher the capability of turning is. And so when the bird is flying at relatively small angles of attack, up to, let's say, 5 to 7 degrees, which is the typical cruising altitude, in this case, the twisting the wings is better. So it produces much higher pitch coefficient, roll coefficient, which produces better turning. But as soon as the bird is at high angle of attack, typically when is chasing a prey or is flying slowly around because it wants to look at a prey, then in this configuration, high angle of attack, it's better to morph the wings, not twist the wings. So our hypothesis is that the selection of course they can do both, but one is more efficient than the other, depending on the angle of attack. And I won't have time to show the video for that. But before that, since my time is running out, I want to tell you now about control. So all these drones are manually controlled. What about autonomous control? Of course, we could use reinforcement learning. We could try to use our model that we have. We understand aerodynamic forces. We could create a simulation and then try reinforcement learning, like black box optimization. But what people don't say so much about reinforcement learning is that we have to come up with a reward function. And the reward function is this recipe of secrets that people take from different papers, similarly adapt. So our first question is, what do birds actually optimize when they do one of their maneuvers that are very complex? I should say that birds know from birth how to flap the wings. So flapping the wings to fly is no problem. They jump out of the nest, they know how to fly, most birds. What instead they have to learn is agile maneuvers where they don't flap the wings. For example, turning very rapidly around the tree or perching on a branch. All these maneuvers require training, and juvenile birds actually make mistakes. So there is a clearly documented process of learning. And so the question is, what do birds optimize when they do different maneuvers? If we understand what they optimize, we can design a reward function that we can then use for training our robots. And so the first thing was to understand what our birds do. And so I mentioned already our colleague Graham Taylor, University of Oxford, published a paper in Nature 3 years ago where he studied in his laboratory some hawks that have to start from a location and then perch on another location. And what he realized that birds always do this maneuver. They dive down, they gain speed, and here they transition and they go into the climbing phase. The climbing phase is where they mostly articulate their wings and tails, and it's the difficult maneuver that juvenile birds have to learn. Sometimes they miss the branch where they want the location where they want to land, or they arrive too fast, and so they hit too fast. So what Graham Taylor said in that paper is that in contrast to what people do with fixed-wing drones when they try to make drone perch on a wall, for example, fixed wings, what birds seem to do, so I should say roboticists, when they do those type of maneuvers, they use reinforcement learning and they try to minimize the amount of time in the reward function required from going from the transition point to the perching point. And what instead, in a complicated design method, a complex design method, what Graham Taylor showed is that birds try, yes, to minimize the amount of time they go to the perching location, but also they try to minimize the amount of time at which they spend at very high angle of attack where they are not controllable. So when you have a very high angle of attack, it's very risky. If you have a wind gust or if you miss something, you may no longer be controllable. And so we show that birds actually do minimize the amount of time they spend at this very high angle of attack. And they also minimize the amount of residual kinetic energy when they arrive at the branch, at the tree, because they don't want to hit the tree. They only let some residual kinetic energy, which is necessary for their legs to comply with the branch. And so we said, is that true? Well, we can use, again, and we modify slightly our drone that you've seen earlier on to match the dimensions and the weight of his hawk. And then, so our drone now has all design degrees of freedom, folding, twisting the wings, the tail, and essentially instead of using machine learning yet, we use trajectory optimization. With trajectory optimization, essentially you define what your optimization criterion is and what your constraints are. You don't have to do any learning. And it's the trajectory optimization method are guaranteed to find to you a sequence of control commands that optimize that function under those constraints. And so what we can do is that we can test Graham Taylor's hypothesis that the bird tries to minimize the amount of time spent at very high angle of attack, minimize the residual kinetic energy, and minimize time, and compare it with what other people, roboticists at MIT or different other places, use for training their fixed-wing drones. And to make a long story short, so we reproduce, I go a bit faster here, we reproduced everything, and we found that only under the hypothesis that Graham Taylor put forward, our drone could reproduce exactly the same type of residual kinetic energy at the perching point, reproduce the same type of trajectory that it collects from the birds. Not only that, but we could also show, as I'm going to show to you in a moment, that the drone could also perform the same sequence of motion of the wing and the tail. So here, just experiments in the lab. We launch the drone from a launcher. We don't have sufficient space for flying it. And then it flies to a virtual perching point. There is no real perching because we don't have the legs here. So it's a virtual point that the drone has to reach. So you can see here in slow motion, the drone goes up there, and that would be the perching point. And here you see a different perspective from the back. And then here you see another one. So this is just the controller. We have also some controller to regulate some imperfections between the simulation and the reality, which is still a bit of a problem. And here you can see the bird trajectory, here the physical drone and our simulated drone. And you can see that we can even explain why, in this paper, we explain why the bird does a particular sequence of opening, folding the wing, and folding the tail to perform this strategy, which was unknown to the biologist. So, one more step. Our drone had a vertical structure. It's not good. Birds don't have a vertical structure in the tail. And so we decided to approach new problems, and we, confident with our model, we made it more complex. So this time we have almost completely folding wings. We have a structure of the arm of the wings of the robot, which is similar to that of the birds. We don't have any longer the vertical structure in the tail. And so we have a drone here that is much more, in terms of degrees of freedom, much closer to the bird. And so we can start to study a number of different problems. This is again Wu, who is starting as a assistant professor at the University of Reno, Nevada, in 1 month's time. So one of the open questions is, biologists found that as the birds soar in the sky, they turn, but when they turn, there is no motion of the wings whatsoever. No folding, no twisting. There is only a motion of the tail. But if you roll the tail slowly, there is no moment. So actually the lift forces are the same. There should be no rolling maneuver there. So why does the bird turn by means of this? Or is it possible maybe that the biologists neglected some other factors? The birds maybe use a different strategy which is not visible from the ground. So we took our drone and we put it in front of the wind tunnel that I've shown to you earlier on. So you have the drone over there. What you're looking now here is the drone from the back. The wind is coming against you. This is the tail of the drone, and these are the wings. And what you can see here is that when the drone is flying against the wind, say in the sky, you would have some turbulent air, depicted here in blue, turbulent air generated by the wings. And this turbulent air interferes with the tail. The tail in this drone is like in raptors, birds of prey, very close to the wings. So there is an interference, actually. The tail can enter into the wake if it is at this angle. If the part of the tail enters the wake, the lift forces here is almost zero. So the only lift forces is generated by this part of the tail, which is not in the wake of the wing. And therefore we have positive lift force here, no lift force here, and all things being equal, the drone will roll to the right. Instead, if you don't have the wings, you remove the wings, you generate the wing, and you move the tail, no rolling angle whatsoever. So that's our hypothesis, that actually birds control this because they have the tail very close, these birds of prey, they have the tail very close to the wings, and they leverage this motion, this interference act. So there are, for example, a number of maneuvers that birds do. Let me see if it plays. Yes. For example, you can see the bird using the tail twist to enter the turning maneuver. And then they also use the tail to exit the turning maneuver. And they do this without noticeable, I'm not sure if this played, they do this without any noticeable motion of of the wings. So everything, the initiation and the stopping of the maneuver is generated by the twisting of the tail and then counter-twisting of the tail. And so if that is true, then we should be able to observe the same thing also in our drone. And indeed, we did a number of experiments to see twisting in one direction, initiating the turn, twisting the other direction to stop the turn. Another maneuver that birds do that are relatively unexplained is that they use the tail twist to control very high-speed sharp maneuvers. You see here they turn, they do a combination of the tail and the morphing. And again here, we can do the same. We can do a combination of tail twist, morphing of the wings, and then again tail twist and counter morphing of the wing to initiate these very sharp maneuvers. And you can see here the drone does this sharp maneuver and then restabilization by combining the synergy of the wing and the tail. So that's again, it explains, it's an hypothesis that we put forward of how the birds actually use the interaction of these two surfaces to generate these maneuvers. We can now start to do interesting things because there are birds like kestrels that can hover in the wind. And so that's great. They look at prey, they don't flap their wings. They stay very stable in the air. And so could we do something like this with our drones? This could save energy. We could also fly in high winds, like in coastal area where there is always wind coming from the ground because of temperature difference to the sea, where fixed-wing drones today have a difficult time to fly in. Of course, you can use multicopters, but they are very noisy, and they are large if you want to fly long distances. And the first thing we had to understand was what is the best configuration to fly against a fixed wing of, say, 10 meters per second in this case. And in this case, we have the drone suspended with a cable from the top. It's just a safety cable. The drone now is flying completely free flight. It's just when we start. And you can see it has a controller on board that makes it completely stable. We use the motion tracking system to tell the drone at which location it is. In the future, we want to do it with vision. At the moment, we are just using the motion tracking to tell the drone where it is. We can generate air disturbances like wind gusts by actually touching the drone. You see my PhD student, Simon, is touching the drone, generating perturbation. And you can see that the drone immediately stabilizes. Now, all of this is done using classical control. So there is no machine learning here. We understood what are the dynamic forces. There are dynamic forces and moments. And so we know exactly what should be the right configuration. What we did not know, and for which we use Bayesian learning approaches, is what is the best configuration of wing and tail morphing to fly at different angles of attack against different wings. And so in this study, we show that there are multiple, I don't have time to go into detail, but using Bayesian learning, which is a very efficient machine learning process, you can do it in real time. In very few steps. Of course, it has also some other disadvantages, but here we could find for different angles of attack and different speeds what is the best configuration regarding the energy consumption that the drone needs to get into to use less energy as possible. What about doing this autonomously? So now learning how to fly to a location. And so we started to do it in simulation. We use reinforcement learning here. What you are going to see in this image is a simulated version of the drone that you've seen. Is it still the drone with the vertical structure? It's not yet the drone without the vertical structure. And what you can see are reinforcement learning steps. We use a model-free approach. It's I think it's PPO. It's a very simple model-free approach. You see the reward function. I won't have time to get into that. But essentially, the goal for this drone is to fly to a location, and the location is given by GPS, and stay stable there by reducing the amount of energy used by the propeller and harvest energy from the wind, essentially. And so the point you will see where the drone has to learn to go, it looks like a yellow ball in the sky. It's just like a point in the sky. The simulator uses the physics-driven, the data-driven model that we have created in the past. So we get all this data in the computer, and we create this model, which is based on the physics that we know, the aerodynamics physics, interpolated with the data points that we get. So it's a physics-informed model. As the drone learns at the beginning, it's not so capable of controlling the trajectory. You see, this is the target where it should fly to. It completely misses it. But as learning progresses, you can see different controllers, different neural networks that control the drone increasingly better. And as you will see gradually, the drone learns to go towards the goal and stay over the goal. So you can see here it's not yet so perfect, but almost there. Still using quite a lot of jerk. Since we also try to minimize the amount of energy used, the drone has an incentive, the reinforcement learning has an incentive for minimizing the amount of jerk, and eventually it gets there and it stays there. The problem is that taking this to the reality is not sufficient. Although we have all the data taken from our drone, there is still a big sim-to-real gap. And the sim-to-real gap in this type of robots is a problem because it's not like in a quadruped, you have a sim-to-real gap. Well, the quadruped is still there, no problem. It doesn't fall. Or if it falls, you can take it out. Here, you have an escalation of problems. So lift forces compounds, the drone destabilizes and becomes immediately uncontrollable and forced to the ground. So at the moment, we are using approaches like physics-informed neural networks, a number of different approaches, where we use data-driven models with aerodynamic laws to bridge this gap, and we also use continuous learning from simulation to reality. It's in progress, but we have already promising results in there. What else? Well, I've shown to you the hawks, but birds come in all sorts of shapes. But it turns out that because of the stringent aerodynamic forces, there are only approximately 11,000 species of birds that exist, compared to the 40,000 species of ground animals, vertebrates. So they're both vertebrates, but ground, 40,000, birds, 11,000. And that's due to the fact that you cannot play so much around different morphologies because the aerodynamics constraints are those that they are. But there is a very nice paper by Christina Harvey in Nature 2-3 years ago, where she shows that actually she can capture all the possible birds that exist today on this planet, the 11,000 species. And those that have existed before, she estimates them to be around 20,000, those that are no longer existing today. And she shows that they vary on a few parameters that are the ratios of the different segments of their arms and the range of motion of these. And these are coupled because these bones are coupled. But essentially, what she plots here is the elbow angle when the bird folds in the wing, and the wrist angle, which is the tip of the wings. And for different types of birds, she shows that there are different regions that can be achieved. So she has this very nice theory of the morphological space of the avian world. And so our question was, can we design drones, even inspired drones, that can be better at a specific mission than any other drone? For example, you want to have a drone that can fly long distance and can just land on a spot very precisely. What is the best configuration of wing and tail and range of motion? If you want to have a drone that is super agile, but perhaps doesn't at the cost of energy efficiency, what would be the best case? So here are trivial examples, but clearly in nature, we can see different flying styles, and we can see that they display different behaviors, and they live in different habitats. So we have now a new joint project started in September with Christina Harvey from University of California, Davis, and Graham Taylor at University of Oxford, where we study with our drone models, where we're going to study the interaction between the different morphological designs and the type of control maneuvers that these different morphologies are better at learning. Some maneuvers are out of range or cannot optimize some criteria like energy consumption for some maneuvers or some morphologies. Some other morphologies will have better results. We did some preliminary research with fixed-wing drones, but I want to skip this. I want to go to my last topic very rapidly. Birds not only fly, but they also jump, walk, and take off. So they are multimodal. And so instead, with our wing drones, we always need either to launch them in the air or they have to take off from the ground, or we need a launcher. What do we need to capture from birds that allow us to make a drone that can walk, hop, jump, and take off? And so in collaboration with my colleagues Auke Niespert at EPFL and Monica Daly, University of California, Irvine. And you can see Won Dong Shin, who was a PhD student. We start now as an assistant professor at Postec in South Korea. And Wu, who is, again, will start at University of Reno, Nevada. We captured only two aspects. And Monica Daly, she's an expert in legs of birds. So she's a biologist. We captured our hypothesis that only two aspects of the legs are necessary to capture. One is this ankle joint, and the other is this toe joint. And I'll show to you why. So the bird, essentially, the idea is that the bird stores energy in the leg as it goes down, and when it jumps, it uses the stored elastic energy in their tendons to help produce the jump. So we capture that by using a spring encoded in the torsional spring in this joint, which actually we show can provide a 25 improvement in speed height for the same energy consumption. The second thing is that you need to have an appropriate torsional spring in the foot. So you need to have a contact, different types of contacts as you walk on the ground. So just to show to you, when the bird is flapping or when it's taking off for jumping, it needs to have a contact at this location, and it needs to be quite free here. When it wants to walk, it needs a combination of this talon and this wing here. And it must be, the torsional spring must be sufficient compliance so that the two work in synergy. So, but you need these two springs. Anyway, we designed a drone. I'm going to see in a moment the videos, but just before that, we did the number of systematic studies. This is a complicated slide. But to make a long story short, what we compared, taking off by using simply the propeller, which would be the equivalent to the bird flapping the wings and taking off. Birds can do that, but they don't do very often. They most often jump and take off. Another thing that birds can do is that when they take off from a height, sometimes we call it falling takeoff. They simply fall off, they open their wings, and they start flapping. Another strategy that they can simply use, or our drone could simply use, is to simply jump or stand. But we're just measuring the energy. But to make a long story short, what is happening is that jumping takeoff is much more energetically efficient than flapping the wings or using a propeller to gain altitude. This sounds counterintuitive, but in fact, the drone gains so much altitude thanks to the jumping mechanism that can be then saved by the propeller, by the thrust. So it makes sense to jump and take off for our drone and for birds. We did an analysis of the investment of total mass and percentage of the body mass in birds for different body mass and robots. Our robot is the only one who can take off, walk, and jump. And what we can see, just to make a long story short, is that cursorial birds and birds of prey invest or spend most of their leg mass as percentage of body mass than all the other birds. For example, birds that are only aerial, they have very tiny muscles. They don't use them a lot. But birds like ours, that are supposed to be agile, to go from ground to the air, they invest quite a lot of leg mass. So our drone, Raven, is the star, is over there, is not yet in that range, but we are very close to it. And I want to show to you the drone compared to a bird that the student has been filming, jumping and take off. You can see that he spent some time on campus filming these birds. Our drone can walk. It's still open loop control, so it needs the tail to stabilize. We can hover a gap, just like the bird does. And then also we can jump up to an obstacle, just like the bird does. Like that. And then finally, this is ongoing work, so I just won't show to you all our conclusions. But the thing is that some birds not only fly, but they also fly and then move in water. And there are only approximately, if I'm not mistaken, 60 species of birds that can fly and then can use their wings to move underwater. And so the question is, how do they do that? And there are very few studies that explain how birds actually use their wings in the air and in the water. And so we asked ourselves the questions, what are the morphological constraints? What are the motor constraints? What are the behavioral strategies that could produce these two behaviors by changing as few parameters as possible, because you want to design a robot to make it. And at the same time, maybe we thought we can shed light on how birds do it. And there was this paper by Anthony Lapsansky is one of the very few papers studied these different birds. And what he noticed is that these are all different types of aerial aquatic birds. And what you can see, like, for example, the northern gannet here, what you can see is that one common thing that you can observe is that when they change, they go from the air, when they change medium, when they go from the air, the blue line, to underwater, the gray line, they change the frequency of flapping the wings. They also change the amplitude for some birds, but the most common aspect is that they change the flapping frequency. But when we see some of these birds underwater, some of them, they also fold the wings in. Others, they do not fold the wings in. So if you fold the wings in, then you can do a number. It could be because you want to save energy. So the torque is reduced if you fold your wings in because the viscosity of the medium is much higher. So there are a number of questions like what is the role of folding the wings? What is the role of frequency, which is an hypothesis here that is used by the birds? What is the right aspect ratio of the wing for moving in the air and in the water? So there are a number of questions. And also, how do you exit out of the water? Some of these birds, then, when they go out, they transition to the air. So what are the strategies used by these birds? Now, for that, we had actually to design a flapping wing drone. This time, we have not used feathers. We have still a membrane type of structure because feathers actually introduce some complication for flight. This is work done, by the way, by Raphael Zoufré, who was a postdoc in my laboratory, in the laboratory of Auke and Ispert, and now he studies assistant professor at MIT, 1st of January this year, in the Aura lab. And collaboration with Anthony Lapsansky, who is a biologist, evolutionary ecologist who studies birds, aquatic birds in the US. And so Raphael designed this drone, this flapping wing drone, to study this problem. And he found the right combination of parameters that allow this drone both to fly and to swim underwater. So we studied a configuration of different hypotheses of parameters of design of this drone with the objective of parsimony. So we want to make the simplest possible design that allows this drone to fly and to go underwater. We also can show that this drone is capable of lifting off the water, as you can see here, just by flapping their wings. And there are a combination of factors that are important for the drone to do this. So, time is over. I think this is a good time to end. Of course, this is a work in progress. We have some results that we will be publishing soon. So maybe I'll keep it there for a surprise for the next time. So we have a number out of this. I wanted to show to you how we go from biology to designing machines and back, trying to understand some questions of biology. And we still have a number of challenges. I want to tell you what I'm interested in this particular area of research. So clearly, the models are important. We still have a sim-to-real gap. There is a lot of work in data-driven modeling and bridging the sim-to-real gap. I don't think that for soft robots, aquatic robots, flying wing robots, just getting data and learning model is going to be sufficient. There's going to be, for example, we already noticed that there are some situations of trajectories that are very hard to model. You need to model the sequence of the aeroelastic phenomena in order to get a good model. So still, getting the good data, how to get the good data for then using machine learning is a big question mark. I also think that there will still be a sim-to-real gap. For example, in our drone, sometimes because of mechanical fatigue, two feathers, they disconnect. And so that creates a huge lift unbalance on one side, and birds have no problem whatsoever. You take pigeons, there are experiments in the 60s, they would do these things. They would cut feathers off. The bird still flies, no problem. So how do they do that? The second thing is vision-based maneuvering. I'm very interested in using onboard vision. You have this very large field of view, very agile maneuver. Sometimes you see the sky very bright, you see the ground, very low dynamic range. And so how can you have a vision system that can control with machine learning this approach? And I think here we're looking at neuromorphic vision, high dynamic range, a lot of data coming in and spiking neurons that could possibly be implemented on onboard controllers. We're also looking at the co-design of the morphology and the control because we think we can optimize some control strategy for some morphologies or some morphologies for some control strategies better than any combination of those. And finally, another thing I didn't have time to cover today, I would like to do flapping flapping wing swarms. At the moment, we do swarms of drones, but there is a lot going on when you are actually flapping wings and you have this agility. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Dario, for that really wonderful talk, many inspiring videos that we've seen. So, yeah, so let's thank Dario one more time.